Stalingrad, the battle that changed the world, greatest battle in history.
Global gateways.
The Battle of Stalingrad was a turning point in World War II, a brutal, six-month siege where Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union clashed in a city reduced to ruins. The Luftwaffe's bombs transformed Stalingrad into a wasteland, but the devastation only hardened Soviet resolve. In the shattered factories and rubble, soldiers fought for every room, every staircase, urban warfare at its most savage. For Hitler, Stalingrad was an obsession. For Stalin, it was a line that could not be crossed. The city became a symbol, its fate entwined with the destiny of the entire war. Over 200 days, Stalingrad consumed more than 2 million lives, soldiers and civilians alike. The German army, once seen as unstoppable, was encircled and crushed by a Soviet counteroffensive in November 1942. The surrender of the German Sixth Army shattered Nazi morale and proved Hitler's war machine could be defeated. Stalingrad's victory electrified the Allies and gave the Soviets the momentum to push westward. The battle marked the moment the tide of World War II turned. Operation Barbarossa, launched in June 1941, was Hitler's bid to annihilate the Soviet Union and seize its land. The German blitzkrieg swept through cities and captured millions, but the vastness of Russia and fierce resistance slowed the advance. Brutal occupation policies fueled partisan warfare, turning the rear into a battlefield. The German army faltered outside Moscow, unprepared for the Russian winter and Soviet resilience. The failure set the stage for Hitler's next gamble, the drive south to Stalingrad. In 1942, Hitler's focus shifted to the oil-rich Caucasus, vital for Germany's war machine. Operation Blue aimed to seize these resources, but Hitler's obsession with Stalingrad split his forces. What began as a strategic move became a personal vendetta, elevating Stalingrad to a primary objective. The German Sixth Army advanced, but stretched supply lines and divided strength doomed the offensive. The city was now the stage for a battle driven by ego as much as strategy. Stalingrad was a lifeline for the Soviet war effort, its factories and river vital to survival. Stalin's not one-step back order left defenders no choice but to fight to the death. General Trykov's tactics forced brutal, close-quarters combat, neutralizing German firepower. Every building became a fortress. Legends like Pavlov's house inspired the nation. The city's defiance transformed it into the unbreakable heart of Soviet resistance. In late August 1942, the German Sixth Army reached Stalingrad, confident after a summer of victories. Hitler unleashed the Luftwaffe, and on August 23, wave after wave of bombers turned the city into a raging inferno. Stalingrad was pulverized, but the ruins became a fortress for Soviet defenders, setting the stage for a brutal close-quarters battle. When German tanks rolled into Stalingrad's ruins, they expected an easy victory, but instead, they entered a nightmare. Blitzkrieg tactics failed in the rubble, as Soviet defenders struck from every shadow with anti-tank rifles and Molotovs. The battle became a brutal, room-by-room struggle, what Germans called the Rattenkrieg, or Rat War. Snipers and ambushes turned the city into a deadly maze where every step could be your last. Stalingrad was slowly strangled, but the cost to the German army was catastrophic. By late September, the German Sixth Army had pushed deep into Stalingrad, launching brutal assaults on the city's industrial heart. The fighting for the main railway station was fierce, with the station changing hands over a dozen times in just days. Control of Mamayev Kurgan, a vital hill, was so contested it changed hands 8 times, its soil forever scarred by battle. At the grain elevator, 50 Soviet defenders held out for nearly a week, turning the silo into a fortress against overwhelming odds. By October, the Germans controlled most of the city, but the Soviets refused to surrender, holding on against all odds. As the German Sixth Army fought in the ruins of Stalingrad, a new enemy arrived, General Winter. Temperatures plunged to -30, snow blanketed the city, and the Germans, still in summer uniforms, froze. Ill-equipped and desperate, they battled not just the Soviets but the relentless cold. Meanwhile, Soviet troops, prepared for the harsh winter, gained the upper hand. For the Germans, Stalingrad became a frozen hell, their hopes of victory buried beneath the snow. While the German Sixth Army fought desperately in Stalingrad, the Soviets, under Marshal Zhukov, secretly massed over 1 million men and thousands of tanks on the flanks. The German flanks, held by weaker Axis allies, were stretched thin and vulnerable. On November 19, 1942, the Soviets unleashed Operation Uranus, smashing through the lines and encircling the German Sixth Army. The hunters had become the hunted, trapped by a ring of Soviet steel. With the Sixth Army encircled, crisis gripped the German High Command. General Paulus, trapped in Stalingrad, faced starvation and relentless Soviet attacks. Hitler, refusing retreat, trusted Göring's promise that the Luftwaffe could supply the army by air, but the airlift failed. Supplies fell far short, and the army starved in the freezing Kessel. The airlift, meant as salvation, became their path to oblivion. While the German Sixth Army fought in Stalingrad's ruins, the Soviets, under Zhukov and Vasilevsky, secretly massed a colossal force on the steppe. Over 1 million soldiers, thousands of tanks and artillery, prepared for a decisive blow. Their plan: encircle and annihilate the Germans at Stalingrad. Operation Uranus, a pincer movement to change the war's course. On November 19, 1942, the Soviet storm broke at dawn. A massive artillery barrage shattered the Romanian lines near Stalingrad. Soviet T-34 tanks surged forward, overwhelming the defenders. By November 23, the Soviet pincers met at Kalach, sealing the fate of the German Sixth Army, now trapped and surrounded. When the Soviets encircled Stalingrad, shock swept through General Paulus and his staff. Trapped and desperate, Paulus urged a breakout, but Hitler refused, insisting on holding the city at all costs. Göring promised the Luftwaffe could supply the army by air, giving Hitler false hope. The Sixth Army was ordered to dig in, condemned to wait for a rescue that would never come. With the Sixth Army trapped and slowly freezing inside the Stalingrad pocket, or Kessel, the German High Command scrambled to assemble a relief force. Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, one of Germany's most capable strategists, was put in command of the newly formed Army Group Don. His mission was to launch a counteroffensive from the southwest, break through the Soviet encirclement, and open a corridor to the beleaguered Sixth Army. The operation, codenamed Unternehmen Wintergewitter or Operation Winterstorm, represented the last desperate hope for the men trapped inside the pocket. The relief force, centered around the LV Dali Panzer Corps, was hastily assembled, but still packed a considerable punch. On December 12, Manstein launched his attack. German panzers, battling through blizzards and deep snow, began to push northeastward towards Stalingrad. The initial advance made good progress, surprising the Soviets and smashing through their outer defensive lines. The German tankers and infantry fought with grim determination, knowing that the lives of their comrades depended on their success. For the starving men inside the Kessel, the distant rumble of Manstein's guns was a beacon of hope. They listened intently to the radios, tracking the relief force's progress, kilometer by agonizing kilometer. The hope of rescue, which had nearly died, was rekindled. By December 19th, the lead elements of the relief force had fought their way to within 48 kilometers of the pocket's edge, a distance they could cover in a single day under normal circumstances. At this critical moment, Manstein radioed Paulus, urging him to launch his own attack from within the pocket to link up with the relief force. This part of the plan, codenamed Thunderclap, was essential for success. However, Paulus was hamstrung. He lacked the fuel to move his tanks for such a breakout, and more importantly, he was still bound by Hitler's strict order not to abandon Fortress Stalingrad. He requested permission to act, but Hitler once again refused to allow any breakout that involved surrendering the city. This hesitation proved fatal. While Paulus and Hitler debated, the Soviets rushed powerful reinforcements to block Manstein's advance. The relief force, now facing overwhelming enemy numbers and a raging blizzard, ground to a halt. On December 23, Manstein, realizing his offensive had failed and facing the threat of being encircled himself, was forced to call off the attack and withdraw. The last hope for the Sixth Army was extinguished. The distant sound of friendly artillery faded, replaced by the silence of the snow and the ever-present thunder of Soviet guns. The men in the Kessel were now truly alone, abandoned to their fate in the frozen hell of Stalingrad. With Operation Winterstorm's failure, hope vanished for the Sixth Army. The Kessel became a tomb, starvation, disease, and cold their new enemies. Rations dwindled to sawdust bread and watery soup. Men risked death for scraps, slaughtered horses, and even hunted rats. Morale collapsed. The only things left, the gnawing cold, pangs of hunger, and the certainty of a slow, agonizing end in Stalingrad's frozen wasteland. By early January of 1943, the Soviet command, seeing the desperate state of the German forces, decided the time had come to deliver the final blow. On January 8th, they offered Paulus an honorable surrender. The terms were generous: food, medical care for the wounded, and a guarantee of personal safety and repatriation after the war. The Soviet emissaries carried a white flag to the German lines, extending a chance to end the suffering. Paulus, aware of his army's hopeless situation, radioed Hitler's headquarters for permission to accept. The response from the Führer was swift, predictable, and utterly devoid of mercy. Surrender is forbidden. Sixth Army will hold their positions to the last man in the last round. Having been rebuffed, the Red Army prepared to liquidate the pocket by force. The final offensive was codenamed Operation Ring. On January 10th, the Soviets unleashed a firestorm from all sides. A massive artillery bombardment involving thousands of guns pounded the German positions for an hour. Following the barrage, Soviet infantry and tanks advanced, systematically squeezing the life out of the Kessel. The German soldiers, weakened by months of starvation and cold, could offer little effective resistance. They were too weak to dig proper trenches in the frozen ground and too short on ammunition to repel the Soviet waves. Their lines crumbled quickly under the overwhelming assault. The fighting was a brutal, one-sided affair. German positions that had been held for weeks fell in a matter of hours. The Soviets relentlessly pushed forward, splitting the once large pocket into smaller, more manageable pieces. The Potomnik airfield, the main hub of the failed airlift, was captured, and a few days later, the last usable airstrip at Gumrak also fell. This severed the final, tenuous link to the outside world. The wounded who had been waiting for evacuation were now abandoned to their fate. For the remaining German soldiers, there was no longer any hope, no escape, and no purpose other than to wait for the inevitable end, whether from a Soviet bullet or from starvation. By the end of January, the Kessel had been broken into two small, isolated pockets, a northern group centered around the tractor factory, and a southern group in the city center, where Paulus had his headquarters in the basement of the Wehrmacht department store. The fighting devolved into a chaotic mop-up operation. Organized resistance collapsed entirely. Terrified, starving German soldiers surrendered in droves, emerging from their cellars and ruins with their hands raised, begging for a piece of bread. The final agony of the Sixth Army was playing out, a tragic and horrifying conclusion to a battle that had been lost months before due to the obstinacy of one man far from the front. In late January 1943, Stalingrad's southern pocket was reduced to ruins. Starving German soldiers huddled in basements, exhausted. General Paulus faced the end in the Wehrmacht cellar. Soviet forces closed in, footsteps echoing above. Paulus surrendered, ending the Sixth Army's stand. The battle ended, leaving Stalingrad silent and shattered. The surrender of the German Sixth Army at Stalingrad in February 1943 was a seismic event that changed World War II. For the first time, the Nazi war machine was stopped and broken. News of the defeat sent shockwaves worldwide, inspiring resistance and boosting Allied morale. The Red Army's victory marked a turning point, shifting the war's momentum and beginning the long road to Berlin. Stalingrad's legacy is both triumph and tragedy, a scar on history. The battle consumed nearly 2 million lives, leaving the city in ruins and generations marked by suffering. Today, Stalingrad, now Volgograd, stands as a symbol of resilience, a solemn reminder of war's catastrophic cost and the courage found in humanity's darkest hours. Stalingrad stands as both a monumental victory and a profound tragedy, where strategic brilliance and human resolve halted the Nazi advance, but at the cost of nearly 2 million lives. Its legacy is a reminder. Every military triumph carries a horrific price, written in the blood and tears of ordinary people. To honor Stalingrad is to remember both its victory and its unimaginable loss. The ruins of Stalingrad teach us timeless lessons. Unchecked power and fanaticism lead to ruin, while human resilience can overcome impossible odds. Remembering Stalingrad is a responsibility, reminding us of the true cost of war, the value of peace, and the need for humane leadership. The legacy of Stalingrad urges us never to forget, so such tragedies are never repeated.